Started.
Great. It is my true privilege and pleasure to be the moderator of Panel 6, our final panel for the evening, the performance culture of POA. We are missing one of our panelists. His name is Ian Michael Williams, and he was going to be talking about Michael Jackson, Pedagogy of Action, and performance and social change. And that is definitely a topic that will be put into discussion after the two presentations that we have. But let me first introduce our lovely artists and scholars that we are speaking today. So the first is Gabriel Peoples. So Gabriel Peoples is a PhD candidate in American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. His interests include Black performance, visual culture, and gender studies. He seeks to advance research that addresses the representations and lived experiences of Black men and women in scenes of social constraint and creativity. Outside of his academic work, Gabriel enjoys freelance DJing and performing his own poetry. Our second panelist is Rodney A. Brown. Rodney A. Brown, founder-director of the Brown Dance Project, is on faculty at The Ohio State University, Department of Dance. Go Blue. Brown's recent scholarship includes choreography highlighting the Black American male's proximity to gun violence involving white police officers in the United States, HIV/AIDS, and Bible Christian education. It is my true privilege again to moderate this panel and to be surrounded by such incredible artists and role models. So without further ado, Gabriel Peoples.
Please ignore the photo up here. It looks like it's from 1975. Okay, so this talk that I'm going to give today is titled, "What's Hip Hop Got to Do with It? South Africa's Influence on the Work of Feminism and Praxis." And so in this talk, I will explore how Black feminism caused me to pay more attention to gender and hip hop music. I also examine the surprising ways that sexual desire and feelin, sometimes labeled as woman-hating or anti-gay, plays out in real life. Lastly, I discuss how anti-sex/sexual attitudes in HIV education can negatively affect HIV risk. And so, first I want to talk about a class and kind of like a project that I worked on within this class. And so, for me, feminism was never limited to women. And so I took a women's studies and African American studies course called Pedagogy of Empowerment. As a final project, I used Common's song, "I Used to Love Her," as a medium to explore HIV infection among Black women. A particular concern for me was its perspective of hip hop, an abundantly Black and male culture and space being personified as a woman. Common conveyed a hip hop that was both vulnerable as sexual prey, quote, "But I respected her, she hit me in the heart. A few New York niggas had did her in the park." Or, quote, "I see niggas slamming her and taking her to the sewer," unquote. And in control of her own sexual acts, quote, "letting all these groupies do her," unquote. Throughout, he is the polite observer, moving in a final patriarchal act to save hip hop from being sexual prey, quote, "but I'm gonna take her back hoping that this shit stop," unquote. And so, some things that I took away from the paper was that he signaled to me how his heterosexual male desire was being expressed literally and metaphorically in the yearning to be intimate with hip hop. Characterizations of women as sexually passive, men's responsibility in using condoms due to their greater social power and sexual decisions, and how otherizing women reduces them to their functional significance to men rather than their own significance by themselves, comes to the vanguard of one's feminist consciousness when listening to this song. These kinds of interrogations in hip-hop music and spaces where female sexual pleasure is marginalized and male pleasure is emphasized are very important. Indeed, increasing the representations of consensual female pleasure is doing feminist work to destigmatize sex as a deviant activity. Hip-hop, for me, is a space couched between the adoration and love for women and their objectification. There is both a phylogeny and a limited space for women to exist in more complexity. I'm interested in a brave feminism that explores these associations. So now I'm going to kind of talk about feminism a little bit. So feminism for me is constructed out of women's experiences with obstacles to their livelihoods. Feminism also derives from the pleasures women engage in. Feminism is then used to transform those obstacles and interrogate those pleasures. Acknowledging this, feminism can prioritize anyone's struggles and being recognized as fully human. I don't label myself as a feminist because, in the words of Patricia Hill Collins, what's in the name? What's more important is the work that I do in the world based in calling out abusive patriarchy and acknowledging my own male and heterosexual privilege responsible for supporting the obstacles that so many women face in fulfilling healthy livelihoods. I also believe that having spaces where I am not inherently the subject as a heterosexual black male are necessary for any coalition where I might be considered as an ally. So moving from feminism, I want to think about Praxis and kind of like what POA has given me in regards to that. And it really emerges as a lens that I use in other work that is very considerate of gender that I'm going to share with you in a second. So taking Praxis seriously is what sculpted me into an ethnographer. Going into the world with an idea and allowing the world to shape that idea and being open to the new directions that it takes you. When I first taught the HIV module, I would go through it just saying the letters and words by myself, then asking students to teach it. Using Praxis and coming back to the drawing board, I noticed that my teaching could be more interactive by involving the students communally. When I say H, you say human. H.
Human.
H.
Human.
When I say I, you say immuno. I.
Immuno.
Deficiency.
Deficiency.
No, hold on. I said what I say. So when I say V, you say virus. V.
Virus.
V.
Virus.
So I noticed hip hop's aesthetics created a communal atmosphere that assisted my pedagogy and students' memory. I believe that the global marketing of hip hop music made its elements as accessible to people as local Kwaito or house music, which I was teaching in 2003 and 2006. I used the basics of those elements to communicate complex ideas about HIV in an even more accessible form. So I moved from that to some work that I'm really interested in carrying out on a more long-term basis, where I'm kind of like this ethnographic DJ, thinking about how I kind of like, thinking about how I control a certain type of affect that people then kind of like communicate as they dance and kind of like reach as they dance. So this little section is called Reading Hip Hop as Homophobic and Sexist. Before I begin, almost in tandem with the people that came up previously, who were discussing help, right? And really like the difference between offering help and being invited to help in a way. I want to share this little story that happened to me right before I got here. I was looking for the belt that I'm currently wearing in TJ Maxx in Atlanta, and I met this woman from South Africa who said that she was an activist in the 1970s here. She then told me that she went to a community and was trying to empower that community to fight and mobilize against apartheid. She received a kind of response that she wasn't ready for, and the community basically told her, hold up, we need water. And so I share this story because there is a colonizing force of prioritizing an agenda for groups of people that is not a top priority for them. If we are being critical, we find that even feminism can proliferate this force. Before bringing fish and teaching how to fish, one must ask what is needed because it may not even be fish. I've had to exercise a similar praxis between my readings of feminist articles on the inherent misogyny or homophobia within hip-hop music and DJing songs that could be considered the same way, yet witnessing very different sensibilities. Out of this discrepancy, I've considered what Lamanda Stallings calls, quote, the intricacies of desire and sexual subjectivity beyond concerns of stereotypes, unquote. What aspects of pleasure are lost when we focus so much on danger in our scholarship and practice? What elements of desire are lost when we focus largely on disgust in our scholarship and practice? In moments where stereotypes are not the highest priority for an audience, as a scholar, how do I highlight that as a huge issue to the peril of other predominant feelings, desires, and sexual subjectivities men and women hold in live settings? The overwhelming presence of black male heterosexuality and erotic desire is not the predominant issue here. It is the underrepresentation of black female and queer sexualities, erotic desires, and sexual pleasures that needs to be interrogated and discouraged. And so I move now. Actually, I kind of want to ask you what you think about this line. It's taken from 50 Cent's In the Club. And then I'm going to move into someone else's ethnographic experience with this song as it's playing. So he says, I'm that cat by the bar toasting to the good life. You that faggot ass nigga trying to pull me back, right? How would you, using a feminist consciousness, read that? Real quick. Maybe just something that comes to mind immediately. Terrible. He's probably questioning his own sexuality. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on. So like this is an analysis by Jeffrey McCune, who was in a gay club and had this experience where this In the Club song came on, and he's kind of interrogating the feelings and like how people are reacting to it around him. He begins, the last line invokes audience participation. As I deepen the groove of my sway dance, gay men and women shout, faggot ass nigga. Actually, they shout the whole line, but it is this part of the line that throws me. It seems contradictory for these queers of color to engage in such a chant. I turn to a friend, giving him a look of shock and disheartenment, and he says, quote, it's just like the way we use nigga by itself, unquote. However, why would those who, like myself, have endured being called faggot, sissy, and punk re-articulate such problematic rhetoric? Why would Sean or DL men in general seemingly draw pleasure from this chant of hate and homophobia? As people throw their hands in the air, almost marching to construct a chorus-like concentric circle of faggot ass nigga, something tells me this is cool. Faggot ass nigga becomes an inside joke. He's surrounded by gay men and women, lesbian, bisexual men and women who are using this term. So it has to have a different meaning, right? So it's kind of like this, his nuanced analysis and kind of thinking about this phrase in this space, to me, it reminds me of this quote from Joan Morgan, which begins, defining ourselves solely by our oppression denies us the very magic of who we are. Some phrases are such an absurdity to chant at a party that everyone engages with it in ways that take on varying meanings and express varying desires. DJing an after party upon which I played New Orleans bounce, a very twerk-centric genre where both men and women may engage in giving and receiving twerking or twerking solo, I throw on Little John and the East Side Boys Get Low, out of necessity. I needed to keep the party going. I had to turn up. So this is a song that summons crowd participation when Little John and the East Side Boys yell out, from the window to the wall.
Hey, to the wall.
Till sweat drop down and fall, till all these females crawl, till all skeet, 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 till all skeet, skeet got. That is the clean version. This is actually what I played at the after party.
I only want the clean version.
Well, I'm just going to say a very small part of the explicit version. Sorry, Nisha. Profanity is very important here in my reading. In what is a clear expression of heterosexual male desire for orgasm from outer course, requiring female submission which can easily be read as sexist, invoking stereotypes of the submissive woman and dominant man. Straight, gay, lesbian, and bisexual black men and women, and everyone in between chant this line at the apex and hottest point, temperature-wise, of the after party. The harmony is a reminder that everything about sexuality, desire, and feeling is not necessarily structured by male dominance and female submission. In fact, I turn the song off at select points in the chant, and there is barely anyone who is not joining in and who does not know the lyrics by heart. Indeed, the beat almost became unnecessary. The entire party was an a cappella during what could easily be interpreted as the most sexist and male-centric point of the song. Even though I played the clean version, everyone sang the dirty version. Yeah. Till all skeet skeet motherfucker, till all skeet skeet got. Certainly, the communal engagement has taken priority in a way that is transforming the power of the words on particular bodies. There is a psychic pleasure that takes place when groups take ownership of a profane phrase, thereby reducing its authority upon their bodies. Both communal chants reappropriate phrases otherwise taken as homophobic and sexist and turn them on their heads. So to conclude and then kind of wrap up with how this comes back to my engagement with HIV in South Africa, I am simply suggesting a caution from the impulse to label things as inherently sexist and homophobic, absent of the context and sensibility that they are also understood within. Ballroom culture in Detroit, where words like cunt, pussy, and dick represent ways of assessing, challenging, and praising masculinity and femininity, is such a context and sensibility. Marlon Bailey, in his examination of that culture, reminds us that, quote, "It is important to take seriously the context in which terms are used and the varied meanings that they carry for people situated within that context," unquote. Indeed, liveness brings us a nuanced understanding of get low and in the club that might otherwise be lost. We have to be able to negotiate these subtleties publicly like we're doing now, lest we begin to treat sex acts as taboo that contribute to their increased frequency in private. Or, as Gail Rubin suggested, taking sex too seriously and sexual persecution not serious enough. So this is kind of like my reflection on this in relationship to HIV. So for my generation of millennials, sexual expression and love for many black bodies, black and brown bodies in the US, is now expressed sonically by the rawness of Kelly Rowland's Motivation, Fetty Wap's Trap Queen, or Beyonce's metaphorically dense Drunk in Love, wherein which sexual acts and desire are explicitly and sincerely negotiated and sung about. This rawness comes to a particular pinnacle when we consider HIV education that is not ready to grapple with real sex to the extent that too much is left unsaid. In Letting Them Die, Catherine Campbell surveys the 1995 Summertown HIV Prevention Project in South Africa, which was a pseudonym for a mining town west of Johannesburg. As a well-meaning development project, it was largely a failure through its method of depositing knowledge that would lead to prevention. She finds that condoms were not condoned, abstinence was encouraged, discussions of sex between young adults and adults were avoided. This disapproval of sex by adults was a primary reason young adults did not use a condom. Indeed, when opportunities to have sex are constrained by parents, the rare time teens are alone, condoms become a waste of time. There was also an optimism that they were invulnerable to HIV, which the ABC method that we talked about does not really address. I would suggest that everyone in Summertown would have had much to learn from hip hop, which I label as a largely prophylactic, positive genre. Indeed, safe sex and lots of it is encouraged and interrogated within hip hop. From Q-Tip's Bonita Applebum, quote, "Satisfaction, I got the right tactics. If you need them, I got crazy prophylactics," unquote. To Dr. Dre's Ain't Nothing But a G Thing, quote, "Ain't no pussy good enough to get burnt while I'm up in it," unquote. And more recently from Race Shremmerd's No Flex Zone, where they say, quote, "She said, why you got so many comments with you? I said, I'm a player to be honest with you. unquote, to J. Cole's honest, introspective, wet dreams, which goes, quote, I'm watching pornos trying to just, wait, hold on, sorry. I'm watching pornos trying to see just how to stroke right, practice putting condoms on, how it go, right, unquote. One can see how open hip-hop music is to safe sex. We look at how the porn industry converges with the hip-hop industry and porn as a deviant influence. However, what if porn is used as a way not to treat every person during a sexual encounter, but as a safe inspiration for sex by oneself? What if this is incorporated into our discussions and modules for ways to prevent HIV contraction while still being able to experience sexual pleasure? And I'm just going to end with a quote from Paulo Freire in the in the tradition of everyone else. One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. Thank you.
All right. Before I begin, there are a few things I'd like to consider when we're talking about the performance culture of POA. Earlier we talked to Fazila, and she saw an opening. She saw an opening and she used her social capital at L'Oreal to work with hairdressers. Mark DeClark, who's here today from Love Life, spoke about using the POA program in various ways. He said, in quote, to empower me as a South African to be able to go out and do what I do. It has to be flexible and creative. Otherwise, the same problems will remain. Danny Park talked a little bit about this, this tension when he pulled up a diagram that made a connection between the social problems, the material, the teacher, and the community. With dance, these things are connected. Dr. Hanif talks a lot about ownership through this pedagogy of action, and earlier I asked a question and she said it's your responsibility. And so this is where I'm at. Choreographing on HIV/AIDS with modern dance, expanding translation as an expression of ownership. One of our students from the 2015 Linsa Varghese says, I've never danced this much. The global HIV/AIDS problem demands a response. Art has provided a comeback. I'm a choreographer and my work with the POA started in 2007. I began translating the module to dance in 2013 under a program called Performing HIV Prevention. This program has been shared through the Brown Dance Project Company and the efforts of POA alumni. Before that, me, the choreographer, has been making dances comprising the theme of African American lives and HIV/AIDS as a form of ethnography or documentation of less hurt lives or narratives. I have to especially thank the POA alumni and assistants who participated in the program and helped get the Performing HIV Prevention off the ground. Could you stand if you're here, please? You can stand, yeah. You can stand, sir. Yeah. These individuals are really crucial to helping this Performing HIV Prevention program get off the ground. For context, the piece I'm talking about is called Module 13. Module was choreographed during the Performing HIV Prevention residency. It was June 2013 in Dayton, Ohio. This development process was put together and published as an online manuscript project entitled Education Options in Dance Composition, the Brown Dance Project translating the Pedagogy of Action module on HIV education to dance. Education options in dance composition is terminology. It places the craft of choreography or the creation of dance movement as a vehicle for sharing information. Beyond translating an HIV/AIDS prevention module into a choreographed dance, the book is writing that highlights research methods, institutional collaborations, international collaborations, and it also documents contemporary dance choreography. My talk is going to outline the kind of work I've been doing in the USA as a result of my presence in the POA program, which has its roots here in South Africa. This talk will also investigate how a lot of painstaking work in the US states of Atlanta, Kentucky, Michigan, and Ohio helped us to organize and establish a unique program that has traveled to Delhi and now here in South Africa. Module 2013 is the first in a series of choreographies translating the POA module to dance. I assert that Module 2013 must be read differently than other HIV/AIDS choreographies because it is a movement translation of an oral education method. In South Africa, art is intrinsically part of the culture of POA. Dr. Hanif, who has a Caribbean background, structured her work to integrate into communities with an appreciative eye towards music, theater, and dance, these cultural ideas. If you've experienced the program here in South Africa, then you are aware that art is a critical part of this program's agenda. Established on the idea of translation, this dance program can be a tool for empowerment, and my expertise in the creative and physical practice of dance enables me to make some room for new directions of this oral methodology. Because of the POA art culture, the POA stands to gain a lot with artists. And I think we've heard a little bit of that when we talked to some of the artists earlier, like Ra, and of course, Gabe. The Praxis involved in creating dance art, experiencing the dance in your head, the act of developing new movements, presenting and sharing those movements with others, as well as the reflection on that action asks the choreographer to consider the aesthetic and context of art and AIDS. This is one of the keystone reasons to generate the POA module in a dance language. In South Africa, the point is to translate the module to other languages. This will help us reshape and help us share this educational message. I want to talk a little bit about the aesthetics of HIV/AIDS dance in the United States. This will highlight the unique nature of this program, both the Brown Dance Project's performing HIV prevention work and also Dr. Hanif's POA module. The first reported cases of HIV/AIDS in the United States were in 1981. By 1989, AIDS was pushing limits. Here's a quote from New York Times published in 1989 by Michael Kimmelman. Quote, "It would hardly be an exaggeration to describe American culture in the late 1980s as art in the era of AIDS. Art has confronted AIDS the way people confront AIDS, with fear, anger, sorrow, defiance, and confusion. In a country that idolizes youth and health, AIDS has struck at the very heart of the American self-image. Art about AIDS reveals something raw in the American soul. The art has illuminated our capacity as a nation to be both self-absorbed and also selfless. It exposes the cruel barriers we erect between healthy and sick, rich and poor. Human suffering has inspired some of our greatest art, but in the midst of a crisis, traditional judgments of quality seem less important. Indeed, the terms in which discussions about the culture of AIDS and art has been cast and are usually pragmatic. Essentially, it's not what AIDS can do for art, but what art can do for AIDS." End quote. Published 13 years after the first diagnosis in the United States, The Art of AIDS from Stigma to Conscience by Rob Baker examines the AIDS art aesthetic and discusses how AIDS has changed the very form and content of contemporary art. A memorable quote, "Not that all of the dances being by persons with AIDS are about death and dying, of course, and not all the AIDS dances being made are being choreographed by persons with AIDS. But AIDS has allowed choreographers and performers to address a number of issues more directly than at any other time previously. Issues of morality, sexuality, sexual identity, of course, but also issues of anger, frustration, discrimination, addiction, and despair, and hope, spirituality, recovery, acceptance, the existing forms of dance, ballet, modern, or postmodern dance, previously touched on rarely with any real depth, feeling, or intelligence. The great dance of the 20th century has been mostly about abstract form, George Balanchine, or clever conceptualism, Merce Cunningham, psychology, Martha Graham, regional or ethnic celebration, Agnes Jamil and Alvin Ailey, or the very nature of movement itself and all of its mystery and ordinariness, Laura Dean. Most of this relies either on prettiness and sentimentality on the one hand, or icy aesthetics and repression of all feeling on the other to sell its wares. Essentially what we're saying here is that this work in terms of performing HIV prevention is unique to the modern dance aesthetic. Society knows some things. The imperative of Module 2013 Dance seeks to develop dance material that a viewer can distinguish some functional differences between red and white blood cells, dissimilarities of HIV/AIDS, understanding of stigma, 4 fact-based ways HIV can be transmitted, and ways to prevent HIV infection, mediated with the modern or contemporary dance genius. Could the BDP or the Brown Dance Project be extending HIV/AIDS and dance in America as a result of our current and previous work, which is based on performing these messages from the module? While the module dance program has developed into various performing HIV prevention theatrical style presentations, it's not the same as a live theater production, but I want to talk a little bit about how live theater productions have been tracked in terms of education and arts. I'm going to share a little bit from the Journal of Health Communication. Quote, much of what is known about the use of live theater for health communication and its impact on audiences is based on research conducted in developing world countries. These studies have consistently shown that well-designed and executed live theater performances are able to engage audiences, influence the knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors of audience members, and positively impact peer social and cultural norms. To reiterate, Module 2013 must be read differently because it is an HIV/AIDS education method. It's sharing it. Beginning with American Modern Dance and the POA HIV method in the USA, I'm looking into this creative process as a way to interrogate how choreography can make a difference and how an individual acquires knowledge. This goes beyond HIV/AIDS. This extends into some of my other work that deals with the Bible. Some questions to consider before I leave you. Can you acquire information if you are unaware of the instruction language? What do the aesthetics of modern dance bring to the idea of language? What is modern or contemporary dance in an African context? How can absorbing a new language move somebody into a new awareness? These are the things I'm interrogating through my work here with the Brown Dance Project. And I'll leave it there because I think we're a little short on time.
Anyway, thank you very much. Oh, here we go. Thank you very much, panelists. Questions, commentary. Ozzy. You can use this one.
Okay, wait, I think this one's working now. Hello.
Okay.
So I actually have a question for Brown and a comment. Well, maybe you can turn it into a question for Gabe. So I think I'll start with Gabe first. So it was very interesting for me to hear you say that hip hop is a, what did you say, positive, safe,
A prophylactic positive genre.
prophylactic positive genre. And it was interesting for me, and I know interesting is a filler word in this case because I can't think of the word right now that I actually want to use, but I think it was interesting for you to use the lyrics from male bodies, because the ways in which I've seen safe sex portrayed in hip hop came through with female MCs. Everyone from Salt and Pepper to Let's Talk About Sex to Left Eye wearing a condom over her eye for a good chunk of time. So I'm kind of wondering why you decided to, and then how does that complicate ideas of kind of violent imagery at times being used, even though they're talking about safe sex in those ways. So could you speak more about that?
Definitely, thank you for that question, Lizzie. I mean, it really has, I think that's somewhat of like my focus on largely men here was really in consideration of the responsibility that men actually have when these things are being negotiated. Which I mentioned, but has also been mentioned, I think, kind of like throughout this day. It's just condoms are biologically created for men, and it really, I think, leaves women at a disadvantage when it comes to like realistically negotiating the use of a condom when sex is actually about to occur. So I just felt like it was of the utmost importance to emphasize men's consciousness of protecting themselves. And I mean, it's definitely the case that, while I say that hip hop is a very kind of like almost, you could say male-centric, it's also female-centric in very different ways. While it's male-dominated, it's also female-dominated in a lot of ways. And like, it just depends on, are you only listening to the radio? Are you a engaged listener that seeks out your own music? And this will result in how many people you actually know about that are engaging in hip hop as a genre, as a culture. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought them up, and I think that through your bringing up of Salt and Pepper, of Left Eye, that now our audience knows men aren't the only people who are talking about this within hip hop. I didn't want to convey it as that, but I mean, that's the reason why I did.
Just to follow up with that question, I know you just said a lot of these rappers are using lyrics with condoms about protecting themselves. Do you find any of these rappers are talking about protecting women with talking about condoms? Because obviously it's built for men, but is there any sort of work that talks about protecting?
Protecting women.
I want to believe that there is. I think all things are possible. I can't really say that like something just comes to mind immediately. But I think that some of it has to do with the ways in which, and I brought this up before with the group, but the ways in which privilege blinds us to sometimes other people's obstacles. So it becomes very kind of selfish, and not necessarily even intentionally selfish, but it doesn't matter for the person that's on the other end that has less kind of like power to control like the discussion around whether or not a condom gets used.
Ozzy, do you have another follow-up?
This question was for Brown. So I remember when you came to Michigan last May or so.
Yeah.
And I remember walking into a North Quad and seeing you and Adrian, and I think walking in with myself, like Raina and Renee and Anna, and then later Raleigh, you all showing us this dance, and then me being like, so you want me to do that? Because I don't think my body can do that.
We're not showing you.
Right.
We did it together.
Right, and so I'm very curious to know what happens when you come up, how do you tackle when people are saying like my body limits me from doing that in like dancing, the ways in which we think we're supposed to dance, or the ways in which you might want us to dance, because I know a lot of the times you were saying it's going to be challenging and we're going to find a way.
Okay, let me share a few figures. This dance was first choreographed, like I said, in 2013. It was performed at Central State University Dayton Contemporary Dance Company Studios. It was performed at the Schuster Center for the Arts. And this is just module 2013. And out of that, there were 46 participants, or 46 individuals in the audience at the studio, and then 40 individuals at the audience at the Schuster Center. A spin-off dance was choreographed for 2 members and performed at Ohio State. That had 25 people, 37 people the next time, 67 people the next time, and then 2 people the next time. Another dance, which you're talking about, the dance at University of Michigan, there were about 33 people in attendance. One more dance happened in Detroit. There was 39 people at that, and dance was implanted in Kentucky, and about 250 people witnessed that dance. From there, we did one more dance, and there were 250 people that witnessed that dance. The final choreography that we've been working on, the last time it was performed is at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. There were about 160 people there. Now, all of these programs have different populations of dancers and dance people. None of these are professional dancers, except for the first set. Let me give you an example. So it's easy to say dance looks like standing up, jumping, running, right? But this could also be a module translation. You had no idea what I did, right? So let's try again. If you were to look at blood up close, you'd see that there are two different kinds of dots. Red dots, taxis, and white dots, which are warriors. The H in HIV stands for human. You can only get HIV from a human. So these are the ways that you can move the choreography from jumping up and down to kicking, right? Into something very, very accessible by more than just a professional dancer.
Okay then.
These presentations.
Kelly, you have a question you want to ask?
Are we closing up?
When you finish, go ahead. No, go ahead.
All right, well, thanks, Gabriel and Brown, first name. Rodney, thank you. Gabriel, your talk inspired me to think about Stuart Hall's work. And one thing I love thinking through Stuart Hall is how to deal with stereotypes. And he says there are three options. One is disavowal, denial. So think Bill Cosby show. We're not like that, maybe it's something that you've got going on. Second one is embrace the stereotype. So blaxploitation films, perhaps what you describe, embracing the language, black minstrelsy. So taking it, running with it, owning it, saying this is us, proud of it. And then the third one is coming up with something entirely new. And performance art sort of falls in that realm that it's so cutting edge that no one really gets it and no one loves it, and it, like one-hit wonders, they come and they go. So where would you put your analysis in conversation with Stuart Hall? And then to Rodney, I've just recently started to read a lot in this Journal of Health Communication, and the whole idea that there is a new journal and there's a center at Harvard, Center for Health Communication, and trying to use the arts as vehicles for health communication. And I think it's actually a little disturbing that the quote you said, most of the research is done in the developing world, and we assume, or the assumption is that it all works really well. One of the values of POA is that it does work really well, and because it's co-creation, it's involving people on the ground and coming up with modules, but a lot of those public health endeavors are not taking local aesthetics into account. So case in point in Tanzania, where I know best, I was asked to work with artists and commission them for World AIDS Day performances. The biomedical units were there to tell what they wanted the artists to sing, dance, and write poetry about, and it was all about transmission through objects. You get AIDS through infected blood, semen, breast milk, razor blades, injection needles. Things give you AIDS. And then it's things that protect you from AIDS: condoms, clean breast milk, clean blood, clean semen, etc., etc. This did not fit with the Swahili aesthetic, which is all about social relationships. Read any song written by anyone along the Swahili coast, listen to a song, read poetry, watch TV shows, theater. It's always about social relationships. So it like came in one year and went out the other, and all the commissioned poems were highly disappointing to the public health people, because they were like, you get AIDS if you're an abusive manager, you treat your workers bad, you're going to get AIDS. You're going to get AIDS if you're a nurse and you prey upon your poor patients. You're going to get AIDS if, and it went on and on with all these exploitative, abusive relationships. And they're like, wait, that's not what we talked about in the workshop. So understanding local aesthetic systems in order to come up with a blended option in terms of doing the health communication is something that I think is really hard, takes time, takes fluency in local languages, investment, thanks to POA, this is a long-term investment and proof of what can work. But a lot of those don't. And I wondered if you thought about that in your own work. I'm very happy that your work is US-based, because I think that's an easier fit aesthetically.
Well, thank you for your question. part of my excitement is that I can bypass all of that politics because I'm translating an oral methodology that's already created. My local language is dance, and dance is movement, and I believe that that is inherent to everyone. In terms of spoken languages, which I think is what you were getting at, we haven't gone there. We are a very, 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 very new program. And I bypass that politic by staying true to what the module is. It's dialogical in nature. The creative process is dialogical in its journey. For example, as Ozzy was speaking about, I come into the studio, I have an idea. These individuals have context in terms of the POA module, some don't. So it's the same sort of deal. When we were at Love Life here, we teach individuals the methodology, we share it with them, and then we allow them to translate it into their own language. And for me, that's movement. And since I believe that movement is inherent to all people, what we do is move it in that way. Now, Ozzy was talking about, well, what if I can't do this? What if I can't do that? And these are the negotiations that we make all the time in language. These are the negotiations that separate mwaki from vega or other terms, other words. I stay to the module, and that's how I organized it currently.
To answer your question, Dr. Askew, I have to really pay some homage to the work of Jose Munoz and what he calls disidentification, which is almost outside of, maybe it's in the third option, but it's almost not even within the options that Stuart Hall kind of negotiated there, in terms of kind of like utter rejection, utter adoption, which kind of could be considered a critique as well. I mean, one can easily see this within like Kendrick Lamar's new work, where he's claiming all of these identities that have been kind of like used to represent blackness, but in his claim of them, he's rejecting them at the same time. So it's like it's not even as easy to like distinguish sometimes, kind of like you taking on something from disavowing it. But anyway, the term, it comes out of kind of like the racism that one might find within queer spaces, but then also the homophobia that one might find within racial spaces, and kind of like how one from, both of those spaces, let's say, has to negotiate their identity by not completely disavowing, by kind of like embracing each, but then pushing away from both, forming a kind of new existence, which isn't really new, it's just who they are anyway, but we're thinking about this on a theoretical level. So, and that's what I have to see, as kind of like going on almost like in everyday life. He uses, it's easy to kind of like look at a drag queen, for example, as kind of like an example of that, kind of like, but I would say in relationship to Get Low, or in relationship to in the club, one can see like how this can play out like outside of that particular kind of like performance, in ways that straight people, gay people, lesbians, bisexuals, everybody in between can manifest something that isn't kind of like easily categorized, definitely. So I just feel myself leaning towards disidentification, because I know that personally, because I didn't do interviews with the folks after the party, that would have been kind of like an interesting thing to kind of be like, yo, how did you feel like when that was on? You were saying all you females crawl or something, and, as a woman, like you're engaging in it. It's strange because it's like it's kind of like a queer thing kind of going on if you think about it. It's like, like Nicki Minaj doing a concert with the dildo, like it's like, okay, so like this woman, maybe she's engaging in this imagination of like skeeting, as Little John calls it, you know, and it's kind of like something queer about that, you know, and maybe like people are uncomfortable with this idea as men, who are also engaging in it, you know. I think it's easy to kind of think about, okay, well, this kind of whole scenario is kind of built around male pleasure, but I think that some men would actually be very uncomfortable with that scenario, but they're still engaging in it. So this is something else kind of going on that I believe will require further ethnography and investigation.
Well, any of these topics could initiate hours and hours and hours of incredible discussion.
We've done that.
We've already done that. And we must bring this discussion to a close. Before I pass the mic off to Dr. Heniff, I must remind you all to tweet and post about this event with our hashtag POASA, to please sign in outside.